Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor Greg Dooley and the Pundit Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
It's the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. We're presented by Nick Hopwood, who is a certified financial planner, founder, and he's the president of Peak Wealth Management, Retire with Confidence. We highly recommend going to Nick's website if you have any financial concerns, questions, or needs at peakwm.com. Greg, we've been gone for a week. What's been happening since I've been out of the country?
The stock market's been rolling, so Nick's probably doing pretty good, Steve. But we took a little time off, didn't we? So, Steve, you were out of town. You were out of the country. Did you run into any Prof and Pundit fans on your tour of Europe, Scandinavia, and wherever the hell else
I did
you were?
a European river cruise. My wife decided to book this during football season. All props and thank yous to her for that. She also did it with 3 other couples, so I couldn't cancel. As it turns out, 2 of the guys listen to the Professor and the Pundit.
Do they really?
So listener Craig and listener Mitch, we had one of the best vacations ever.
Awesome. Well, I was thinking about doing like a special episode when Steve was gone, but I can't quit you, man. I couldn't do it without you, so we held off. And I think it was actually a good time. So what's going on? We know if you're listening to this, you're reeling a little bit. And this was kind of a challenging bye week. We've been licking our wounds after a rough finish in Seattle, and we'll talk very briefly about the Washington game because it's had a lot of time to marinate. But we got a big game coming up, Steve. This game against Illinois is really going to kind of sort out where we fit in this hierarchy of the Big Ten. We know we're not at the top, but we got to talk about that. And a lot of things happen in the Big Ten that'll add some context and flavor to that, and we'll, of course, do our preview. But we got to start briefly with that game at Washington, Steve. We're running out of QBs, okay? We're down to our 3rd QB. For a moment there, Jack Tuttle, to me, he looked like Tom Brady. He was going to his 4th progression. He looked calm and cool.
What's a 4th progression?
He went to the eye black. He looked the part. And then he and we just crumbled. It didn't work out very well, Steve. But what did you see out there?
Yeah, Greg, it was a bit of a surprise to see Jack Tuttle come in. Now, I knew he had been injured for a while. I think everybody knew that. It was very cryptic about how long it would take for him to actually be on the field because Michigan fans are desperately searching for answers. You have 2 QB3s, essentially, in the Big Ten. That's what I call them because they play like third-string quarterbacks, Alex Orji and Davis Warren.
Michigan will debate this.
And everyone wants to go, well, Jack Tuttle at least started at Indiana. Well, maybe he can do something. Maybe that was a part of the plan overall. But it was a surprise to see him in the second quarter because Alex Orji's offense is feast or famine. And most of the time, Michigan goes hungry. But if they can feast or they can make a play on 10% of them, it might be good enough for a long touchdown or a big play that sets them up for Zavada, who is almost automatic from 50 yards out. So I was kind of surprised about how he was pulled early. It was great to see what Jack Tuttle did. And I think Washington defensively wasn't prepared to play against a team that has any skills in the passing game.
Michigan will debate this.
And a couple possessions go by. Michigan looks great. Washington comes back and adjusts defensively. They say, well, this team can't pass. Let's start playing a normal pass defense. And then I think things took its toll on Michigan.
But what do you think this portends? Do you expect Tuttle against Illinois? And do you think this could solve our problems here? What do you think?
No, I don't think it's going to solve our problems because, again, once a team starts to recognize what Michigan is going to be and they see things on film, they're going to attack that. Jack Tuttle, to me, is a QB2 in this conference. I think he's going to be able to do some things with the passing game that none of the other quarterbacks have been able to do, which is a positive. It's also a positive that he's somewhat competent rushing with the football. But again, this is a guy who has taken 9 months off at least because of an injury. And if you take a golfer who hasn't played in 9 months, he's not going to shoot even par at a major. If Duncan Robinson decides to take 9 months off from shooting a basketball, he's not going to be lighting it up from 3 the way that he did like in the previous game before he got hurt. So I can go up and down with a whole bunch of analogies when people take time off, but he's not a video game. It is not a video game setting where all of a sudden a guy gets his rating and he's going to be that way. When you come off an injury, you've got to have some time and growth to come in. So if there's some bright sides to this, and if Jack Tuttle remains to be the starting quarterback to the end of the season, I think he will get better. He probably, at this point, may now have the higher ceiling.
The offense had its chances, and again, you mentioned, I think there were 3 straight drives when we scored when Tuttle came in. The other thing was, and I haven't heard people talk about this a lot, there was the one play with Donovan Edwards. He scored it on a big touchdown, but it looked like he had another home run, Steve, with the blocking. It was all set up, and he cut and slipped, and there were at least 2 holes where if you project out, all he would have had to beat is the safety. He would have been gone again, but slipped. And I think that was a big play that I haven't heard a ton about.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of game film in the past, and you'd be surprised what looks like to be a giant hole, how quickly it closes. If you look at the small to medium-sized holes within the built-up of the line, you see like a clear thing, and then all of a sudden, like a half second later, it's completely closed, or something that's completely closed a half second later completely opens up. I give credit to running backs to be able to recognize the difference. The point is, could it have closed quickly? Yeah, but I tell you, it did look like a gaping hole, and it was one man to beat. From the surface, it looked like it was going to stay open for quite a while. Given the situation in which Michigan could have taken the lead in the fourth quarter, that was kind of big.
It was. I thought it was big. On the other side of the ball, the coaches are getting a ton of criticism, but the defense is getting picked on a lot here for how we closed or didn't close out this game. What did you see on defense?
For Michigan, they're just giving up a lot of yards. The secondary is being caught on out and ups, double moves. Like a defensive player may have co-responsibilities. Here's responsibility A, here's responsibility B. At a certain point, when the play is happening, you could take a glance and realize that one of those responsibilities no longer matters, and that you go to the other responsibility at 100%. And they're not doing that, and I think a lot of that just has to do with inexperience, something that they could get adjusted to.
Yeah, so Wink is taking a bunch of heat. Wink Martindale from the fan base right now. He seems to be the biggest target of the fans as far as the coaches. I think people understand Sharon. This is his first year. Even Kirk Campbell has taken a little bit less heat. I saw one fan marked himself safe from Wink Martindale during the bye week, which is like the hurricane, which is brutal. So Wink is taking some heat, and even Joel Klatt has been critical, and there's been a few formations on defense where a lot of fans who break down film, WTK and otherwise, are kind of scratching their heads about how did we get in this situation. I do think it comes back to, Steve, what you were talking about, is we're still running that super highly complicated defense, that NFL-style defense, which requires you to have a lot of options about how you roll, how you communicate, how they signal each other. And we've got younger players filling some of those spots. So I think we're seeing some of that. Ultimately, the coaches have to call plays that the team can support, and I think that's where fans are getting frustrated.
Piggybacking on that, when you're doing something that's complicated, and they're not able to do all those complications, the coaches says, well, we'll simplify the offense or the defense.
Right.
And what happens is when you do that, you become predictable. And then every other coaching staff recognizes that. When it's offense who is simplifying, they say that, well, it's one of 8 plays. And it's just a variation off of that and makes it easier for us to defend. That's where you hear the players afterwards going, we knew exactly what they were running.
Right.
Because the team said they were going to simplify the offense. And it's the same thing with the defense. A quarterback who has mastered what defenses tried to do, make changes at the line of scrimmage based on pre-alignment. Now we're preaching not only fundamentals, but we're also simplifying things.
I think one of the themes before the game was that notion that, yeah, these teams met a few months ago in the national championship game, but everything's different. You know, they lost so many guys. Look at the coaching staffs, everything. But the Huskies do seem to have a little better prepared at quarterback.
I mean, Washington had more to replace than Michigan did, but the Huskies found a starting quarterback in the transfer portal where Michigan did not. If Will Rogers stayed at Mississippi State, I mean, he would be the SEC record holder in several categories. That's a huge answer for Washington. And the other thing that the Huskies did that they hadn't normally done in the season, but they did in the Michigan game, was the Huskies only forced 4 turnovers through 5.5 games, but came up with 2 critical ones in the fourth quarter within Michigan territory. And then they did something else that they haven't been able to capitalize on. They were able to score in the red zone, which is something that they were not doing a very good job the other 5 games they've played this season.
So a few sights and sounds, Steve. One thing is we did get some feedback from many people who went to the game, made the trip to Seattle. It was kind of a special thing, the first Big Ten game. And by and large, everyone just seemed to have a wonderful time. It just seems like a really cool place. I know we're licking our wounds after a loss, but it just seems like it's kind of one of those destination, believe it or not, conference teams that you want to go. The sailgating, Seattle's awesome.
Mountain climbing.
It sounds like their fans were really cool. So shout out.
Welcome to the middle. Welcome to the middle, everybody. We're talking about the conveniences and the niceties of going on the road and the things you can do outside of the football stadium.
That's our brand, Steve, the middle. So anyway, so what else happened? Chris Bryant. So I happen to know CB a little bit because he's been a speaker in my NIL class, and I know his story, his background. It's amazing. And he went after a couple Husky fans and got caught on video and elicited a response from the athletic department saying, hey, it shouldn't have happened. And these Husky fans got a dose of CB protecting his guys is what happened. And his words were sharp, harsh. If you looked at the look in his eyes, it was serious stuff. And CB's from Chicago. When I say Chicago, Steve, I don't mean which suburb, Chicago, where are you from?
From Juwan Howard, Chicago.
Yeah, this is from Juwan Howard, Chicago. And when CB came to Michigan, one of his things he was surprised at where are all the metal detectors? That's the environment he went in high school, was metal detectors, check your bags, rough stuff. Like, that's his background. But his role is kind of like the uncle or older brother of the football players, where he looks out for them. He's a guy who a lot of agents talk to say, hey, what kind of kid is this? All that kind of stuff. And it's almost like that role where he's the guy who's got to say something if he thinks his players are being disrespected or treated poorly. Whether he should have gone after fans, knowing that everyone has phones like that, I don't know.
I do know.
But it sounds like somebody needed to say something. And here's the other thing. I assure you that CB's been with these guys a long time. They get heckled at every game by opposing fans on the road. Something was said that crossed the line, and you can say, well, they were losing and this and that. I back him up. I think you need that guy, and people don't like Draymond Green. He plays a really, really important role for the Warriors about their culture. When you look at their coaching staff and stuff, sometimes you need a guy. When you play that role on a team where you are that bigger brother or uncle, he's protecting his players, man. So I back him up on this. So free CB, he's doing his job. Yeah, he's got to realize that's going to be on social media, but I defend him. A lesser harsh person, but someone who everyone's eyes were also on, is Judge Wilkin. And this is the judge out of California in her last case, by the way, Steve, who gave approval for the house settlement that we've been talking about so much. This is a big deal, okay? This will affect CB. This will affect a lot of people in that building who kind of work with the roster and everything. So now you've got schools, administrators, athletic directors, coaches, players, now kind of scrambling to figure this out. So what does it do? The House case will allow for back pay back to 2016 based on a formula to college athletes, okay? The money is picked from future NCAA money revenue that they're supposed to get to compensate these players. The big thing moving forward, Steve, around $22 million starting next year can be distributed to current athletes. So 2025 athletes can get this money starting next fall. All right, that is big. They also imposed new roster limits and removed restrictions on scholarships up to those roster limits. Football. The whole roster will be reduced to 105 people on the team from around 130 to 140 guys in Schembecker Hall right now. Will be reduced to 105. But they can give everyone on that roster a scholarship. But that's the same for all the other sports too. Softball now can give a scholarship to everyone. Michigan put out a notice saying we're not going to cut sports. Ward put out a notice saying we're not going to cut sports, but if we're going to give the full amount of revenue share, we intend to do that. That's $22 million. If we're going to cover all of the other scholarships, that's another $30 million. So all told, this might cost the athletic department $50 million if they go all in and fully fund everything. I don't think they're going to. $50 million even for Michigan, Steve, is a crap load of money.
I was just going to ask you whether you thought every scholarship was going to be filled.
I don't think so. But let's put rev share aside for a second. Let's assume the football team is going to get 70 to 8% of that money. It's going to be somewhere in there. And even the biggest advocates for Title IX and equality agree that the football team should get more of that money. Okay. Put that aside. Most of the coaches right now are elbowing for how many scholarships, who gets scholarships, where are my extra scholarships. That's what they're concerned about. They're less concerned about the revenue sharing. I think women's basketball is going to get some of the revenue sharing. Hockey will get some of the revenue sharing. You might see softball and women's basketball and gymnastics get some of the revenue sharing. That's what they're fighting for right now. So figuring that out, Ohio State, right before this was announced that the judge approved the settlement, okay, already said, we're getting rid of our men's gymnastics scholarships. Okay, they said it ahead of time.
All of them.
Yes. So it's going to be, we're going to have a team. It's going to be a varsity team. They're just not getting scholarships. Okay. There's lots of things in play. Let's assume the football team will add 20 scholarships to take it up to 105 from 85. That means you do, based on Title IX, have to find 20 more scholarships for women's sports. Okay. Michigan, by signaling and throwing out that $50 million number, is basically saying, look, we want to fund as much of this as we can, people. So they didn't say this. Don't be surprised if we start advertising in Michigan Stadium. Don't be surprised if the football is going to be presented by UPS before kickoff.
Don't be surprised if your tickets go up.
But we add a talent fee like Tennessee did. Don't be surprised. We need more money. Here's the other thing that people don't think about. Okay, this is coming. It has to be, there's still a window for objections, Steve. There's another window for objections now and all that stuff. But it's supposed to be approved officially in April. But all schools right now are assuming it's going to be. But guess what we have to do until say August, September next year? We still have rosters full of people and NIL commitments to keep, okay? So people, next year's roster, recruits, all that stuff, there's still NIL commitments and things that need to be upheld out there. And for players to come, to stay, the transfer portal, all of it's still in force. We need to fund that gap until revenue sharing comes in. The other big question is, does NIL go away? Absolutely not.
No.
NIL is more akin to a human right. You have the right as a young person to make money from your fame. Okay, sure, Dooley. That's, endorsements, restaurants, all that stuff, absolutely. But what about the collectives? The collectives aren't going away either, because there's still those cases where you need to put something over the top. Okay, tons of questions, Steve. Does the quarterback get more than the second string punter on the football team as we distribute this money? The case doesn't tell you at all how to distribute the revenue sharing at all. Most schools are looking at their formula for how they're doing the back pay and kind of applying that to this first year. That's how they're thinking about it, if that makes sense. There are a ton of questions. This is going to have a huge impact on the operations of athletic departments in general. So we'll see. There's still the big question, Steve, of women's hockey. Are we going to add a women's hockey team? This is a really, really tough time to add a hockey team with a lot of expenses. But I will tell you that athletic departments are rethinking how they think about finances and all that stuff. So there's a ton of questions. We will get into it as we learn more, Steve. I think we should talk about it. If you're a fan of any sport, whether it's softball or rowing or football here at Michigan, it will have an impact, and we will see where it goes.
There's no shortage of material. Craig just listed out about 50 things that we could talk about and do a podcast on each, so we'll continue to do that during the off-season.
It's almost like I just wrote a essay question or two for my midterm exam on this, Steve, which I did. So anyway, our boy Connor Stalions is out there, Steve. Not only does he show up to tailgates and he's at Michigan football games, he has been out there in the media. Did you catch any of his interview with Taylor Lewan and the Bussin' with the Boys podcast? Did you see any of his work out there?
Seen a couple of excerpts. Again, when you're out of the country, you can't get streaming video very often. So, yes, I did see a couple of excerpts.
Yeah, so my man basically broke down in more and more detail how he went about his business. He revealed other things that were going on. Again, this is one person's perspective. but he seems very, very engaged in this. He said Ohio State had like 8 guys who were flashing the signals, but never changed the person who was the live actual signaler. He said Michigan State wasn't doing any of this very well, like trying to cover up what they were doing or trying to look at seals. He talked about a whole network of information being exchanged between teams. He just talked about how obsessively he would sleep in his car. I think we knew some of that, just to spend as much possible time he could at his craft here. It does lend more support to this is a wildly obsessive guy, that everyone was doing it, and that he was really good at it. He was really good at it. But it doesn't forgive him for what I think was the stupid stunt at Michigan State for the disguise. It doesn't forgive that, see, in my opinion. But the notion of sign stealing and the whole operation, and it's funny, you watch any sport today, even when pitchers go to the mound in Major League Baseball, what do they do with their mouth, Steve? They talk behind their gloves. They cover their lips. They're worried about lip readers. Well, where are these coming from? The dugout? They're worried about film. They're worried about people picking off any kind of edge they can get. Coaches do it on the sideline. They cover up everything today. They're worried about cameras and other things picking this stuff up. Everyone is doing it. He did go too far, and Michigan probably will be punished for it. But hearing his scale does lend to the side that this is a lone wolf guy who was obsessive, but also very good. I leave all of this respecting him for the dedication he put into this. The only disappointment is there's those couple moments where he just got a little too cute.
Obsessive, dedicated, pioneering. That's Connor Stalions.
Did you hear he said he knows one school? I don't think he revealed it had Bluetooth in the helmet. Like they were actually physically communicating. Did you hear that part?
No.
Yeah, he goes, I know one school that had Bluetooth already in the guy was on Bluetooth talking to him, relaying the plays.
But he didn't say.
I don't think he said who it was. Yeah. So,
no.
But wow.
It's the one way to keep yourself out of the news.
And you thought we were going to stop
naming.
talking about Connor Stalions. We will not, because at some point a punishment will come down.
At some point.
Yeah.
And, the thing with the documentary is, whatever credibility, but then in the investigation where he says, I can't recall whether I was on the Michigan State sideline, it's just like, okay.
That didn't help either. Yeah,
No.
So it's just the whole thing around the Michigan State game in that Central Michigan it's just bad. You think CB's a bad look. That was the bad look of bad looks. I think he got too cute. I think he was arguably having fun with this, and it was a funny story, but he just took it too far. So there you go. Steve, we got to get in the locker room, man. I need a breather.
That whistle means it's halftime here on The Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. And joining us in studio right now is Nick Hopwood, the certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Nick, great to see you again.
Great to be here, Steve. Thank you.
Real estate around Michigan Stadium. I have learned that some people have multiple dwellings around Michigan Stadium that they would either rent out or just as a getaway for something convenient when they're in town in Ann Arbor this weekend. Real estate still important in today's world of investing?
Oh, absolutely. And I think what you're referring to could be, a regular rental where you have someone paying the bills 12 months of the year and then you're tailgating in the driveway or the yard. Or it could be an Airbnb setup around the stadium. There's a lot of opportunity for that. Personally, I have a lot of duplexes, which is your annual rentals. And I think it's great because it's a pension for me.
How so?
It's a pension for me because the tenants between now and retirement are paying off the mortgages. And then once the mortgages are paid off, I get into retirement. And now all of that income is free and clear as a pension for me without doing any work.
Wow. So the individual acquires the real estate. The tenants pay for the mortgage. And then when the mortgage is complete, you get 100% of the rent. Well, if you want to know more about real estate investing, go to peakwm.com or call 734-681-7575. That's peakwm.com.
All right. One of John U. Bacon's fun stories to tell is he revealed to somebody that he was from Michigan, and the guy goes, well, that figures, because guess where I'm from? And Bacon goes, Ohio State. He goes, no. Michigan State. No. Notre Dame? Nope. Penn State? Nope. You're kind of getting me here. Minnesota, Wisconsin? Nope. Illinois. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Of all the people you meet, you meet someone from Illinois, and Bacon's like, yeah. And this gets to Illinois hating Michigan and feeling like this is a huge rivalry, where it's the ultimate. Michigan could give a crap. Like, Illinois is 7th or 8th or 9th on our list of people that really get our juices flowing. Like, I'd argue for a period, Purdue even was higher with Danny Hope and all the stuff that happened with Purdue. Like, Illinois is down there pretty far, Steve.
It is down there pretty far, but it goes down to a certain age group, and it has to do with, Gary Moeller leaving Michigan to be the head coach at Illinois. Gary lasted like 3 seasons. Bo took offense to when he got fired, and Illinois got better with Mike White as a head coach, but then Bo suspected Mike White to not be the most ethical person or on the up and up.
Yes.
That got Illinois fans even more mad about that. Illinois beat Michigan in 1983 for the first time in a long time. So, yeah, there was a period where Illinois fans relished hating Michigan, took advantage of the couple of wins that they got. It carries over into basketball. It's part of our generation growing up when we were in high school,
a little bit.
And as kids, the late 70s through the late 80s. And of course, Michigan, Illinois has their own little basketball history in 1989 as well. But yeah, that's what it's mostly about. And I'm sure it was one of those people from that particular age group that got into Bacon's ear about that. But it is so funny because Illinois ranks really way down the list.
I think it even goes deeper because we had Bump Elliott when they had Ray Elliott as their coach, and Bump always beat his brother and, really prevented them from doing some great things. And even deeper than that, when we go back to our roots of our football program, we were really established with Fielding Yost. And Illinois at the same time had a great coach, Bob Zupke, and Illinois fans or historians know who I'm talking about. But Saturday marks nearly 100 years to the day, and I wonder if this was planned, Steve. I don't know how much massaging there is in scheduling, but they're celebrating now. And I think this is on their field is the 100th anniversary of the dedication of Memorial Stadium, which happened on October 18th, 1924. This is certainly the most famous game in Illinois history, I would imagine. It's the dedication of their stadium. But it's one of the classic games in college football history. This is when Red Grange went nuts. And he took the opening kickoff, 95 yards for a touchdown. He had runs of 67, 56, and 45 for touchdowns in the first half against Michigan. He ran it through for 2 more scores in the second half. He picked off 2 passes. He became a legend after this. This is when people started waxing poetically nationwide about the galloping ghost in Red Grange. He's arguably the greatest football player ever. I said it. He may be the most important football player ever because he left the next year. He left Illinois early before he graduated. This was a big deal in 1925 and went to the new NFL and played for the Bears. Big deal. No. Part of his contract was to get a cut of the ticket revenue, and people believe he made 6 figures at the time when people were making like $100 for a game. He may have made over $100,000 for a couple of these games. This is a big deal. But people from New York to California packed stadiums to see him, and it legitimized pro football. But it all kind of started with that game to dedicate Memorial Stadium 100 years ago this Friday. And again, they're going to make a big deal out of it on Saturday, and it will get them pumped up. They still celebrate Red Grange. They have a race like the Grange race where the students or somebody race across the field. But he's a really, really important figure. In fact, we have the great Tom Harmon who did incredible things and had games like that. Harmon was kind of compared to Grange as far as his greatness. Obviously, he would have won the Heisman Trophy had they had it at Red Grange. One more thing, Steve, with Memorial Stadium. Did you know that one of the columns in the stadium is actually dedicated to a former Michigan player?
I did not.
Curtis Redding. He was captain of the Yost 1903 team. Memorial Stadium, the columns are dedicated to people who fell in World War I, who died from the state of Illinois. Curtis Redding, a Yost player, happened to be from Illinois. One of the columns actually bears his name, is dedicated to him, and Yost is actually on a plaque inside Memorial Stadium for being one of the people who helped donate to Memorial Stadium to make this happen. So there are some really old ties. And I think when you get back to the rivalry, Steve, when we talk about history obviously is a big deal at Michigan with all our wins and championships and Yost and all this stuff. I think a lot of Illinois fans put themselves in the same bucket as we're a historic power. We're Illinois. Red Grange, Bob Zupke, they kind of do that. Where they missed is they didn't have the sustained success that Michigan had over all these decades, and that's the difference. And yes, they hate Michigan very, very much for all the reasons you described.
I saw a lot of medieval buildings over the last week, and they've got like a chunk of a pillar, like it's broken off, like it's a part of the old, Greece Roman facilities out on the field with a plaque of Red Grange's stuff on that. Also, just want to mention that at the time, you mentioned how important it was for the NFL. It was a UFL-like league that really nobody paid attention to until Red Grange came and played. And to do that, as you said, he took a giant revenue percentage of tickets being sold, and it forever changed the game.
Well, and you got a lot of crap for it, and even people like Yost and his own coach discounted the idea that football could be a career. What are you talking about, right? And he was a big factor. There are other players who were big factors in that, like Benny Friedman from Michigan was a huge, he revolutionized the passing game in the NFL. There are other players who are really important, but a lot of it goes to that moment. And I talk about Red Grange in almost all my classes, Steve, because his leaving college early for money, right, and his name was so famous, he's an early example of this struggle between amateur athletes and professionals and whether they should be paid or not. And he left. And you're like, big deal. Well, in our lifetime, Steve, players have been criticized for leaving early. They don't do it anymore. We understand. But, even at Michigan State, people got it. But Magic left as a sophomore at Michigan State. Magic could have gone right to the NBA right out of high school. But he played 2 years, and I remember people were urging him to come back. Ty Law. Lloyd Carr disagreed with Ty Law going to the NFL, or at least people did within the Michigan building. Ty Law's in the Hall of Fame now, it's there is this struggle, but this happened in the 20s, so it's kind of remarkable. But Steve, I guess the biggest thing is what's going to happen in this game, and where is Illinois at right now? Because the team I thought they might be, it raised some questions watching how they struggled a little bit against Purdue.
So going into the season, Illinois was looked at to be a team that may or may not make a bowl. And if they didn't make a bowl, I think more Illinois fans were probably done with Brett Bielema, or at least the thought that Illinois will turn into something relevant. Right now, they are 5-1. They beat Michigan, they get bowl eligible. They already make their goal on October 19th if they can win. They're 2-1 against ranked teams. Their best win was in Nebraska. Now, Saturday, they should have destroyed Purdue. Purdue is one of the worst teams in football, and going into the game, they didn't have their starting quarterback. They were a massive 23.5-point favorite over Purdue last week, but that 23.5-point favorite, Illinois, that's a bigger spread than Alabama had over Vanderbilt. And then the Illini needed heroics after blowing a 24-point second-half lead. They won 50-49 after one round of overtime, in which Illinois' defense, which had been pretty good coming up to this game, allowed 46 points after halftime.
Amazing. That's remarkable.
It is probably one of the games that nobody saw because Penn State and USC was going on at the same time. But it was an amazing game. Now, if you want to know him a little bit, Luke Altmaier is their quarterback. He's tied for first in the Big Ten with 14 touchdown passes. Has only one interception. That also leads the Big Ten. Last year, Greg, he was 13 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. And he got hurt and then was eventually benched when he even got healthy. So this is quite a turnaround for Luke Altmaier, who struggled with confidence, struggled with performance, and it was like a reclamation project to get Luke Altmaier to be a decent quarterback. And is he on the top half? Yeah, and he's done a lot of good things. It's a remarkable the improvement that he's had from one year to the other. Their leading rusher, Caden Fagan, hyperextended his knee in practice last week and is expected to miss the game. And then in their passing game, Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin are a pretty lethal combo at receiver. Bryant has 7 touchdown receptions, which is more than what the Wolverines has as a team.
So it's a difficult thing, right? Because we win this game. I don't think anyone's, depending on how we play, I don't think anyone's really satisfied, right? That this says a lot. We lose this game, Steve. We're now firmly in the bottom half of the Big Ten, right? I mean, we're definitely in the middle, maybe the bottom half.
Well, you start ranking
Yeah.
teams who are below or above you, and you're trying to be realistic. I think there's a giant middle.
Yeah. Our biggest win, or our big win, we all celebrated. It's still a great win. USC, they've been struggling. We lose to Illinois, Steve.
All heck is going to break loose.
Yeah, that's where I'm going here.
All heck is going to break loose, but this is a team that is ranked, that has a good win on the road against a fairly good team in Nebraska this year, which is having their own reclamation project. Nebraska hasn't been to a bowl game since the 2016 season. But the point is, if Michigan beats Illinois, this might actually be their biggest win of the year, even after USC. Because one, Michigan will do it on the road. Michigan will have won against a ranked team. USC has continued to fall, albeit close games every time for them. Illinois will be ranking as one of the top wins of the season, but you're right. It's ironic that against that backdrop, a Michigan loss means basically it's over in everybody's mind.
It's gonna be over. We've said all year though, we have this difficult schedule. We still have some teams, obviously Ohio State down the road, but also Oregon, and they're coming to the big house. And of course now Ohio State fans are hoping we pull it together a little bit, not enough to beat them, but enough to be competitive against a team that put up a really good performance at home in the premier game, other than Texas and Oklahoma, I suppose, but the premier game of as far as attention, 2 versus 3. Ohio State goes into Oregon. The fantastic game, Steve. What did you see?
Well, for one, for Oregon, it was their best win in their history in terms of rankings, beating a top 2 team. The best team money could buy lost a game. I think the reason why Ohio State lost this game was Will Howard, their quarterback. And he was always a question mark kind of going into this. Is he better than Kyle McCord? I mean, he looks like a leader on the field. He does things with his feet that Kyle McCord can't do. I was more impressed with his passing game than I thought I would be going in.
He was really good throwing the ball. Yeah.
And that did surprise me. But when it came down to it, there was some clock issues. There was an offensive pass interference. They were within field goal range to win the game. And they got pushed back because of an offensive pass interference penalty, which is a little bit questionable, by their freshman Jeremiah Smith. But then there was a timeout, but Will Howard couldn't find a receiver open. He tried to run into the middle of the field to get his team within field goal range, lost track of the clock, slid down as time expired. Ohio State runs out of time with a timeout left.
You can't do it.
And they lost the game that way.
It wasn't like a quick run, too. He went back, he moved around a little bit, then took off and took 2, 3, 4 too many steps. Had to go down, didn't. That's on him. That's tough. He's probably taking a beating right now.
What he was trying to do was get them within reasonable field goal range and couldn't do it. So at least for now, Ryan Day didn't throw Will Howard under the bus. But Ryan Day, since 2021, 0-3 versus Michigan, 0-2 versus Oregon, lost their last 2 bowl games. But at least they beat Notre Dame and can recruit. On the other side for Oregon has always been a chump in big games like this. They've always looked like world beaters against everybody else, but they go and play a big game of importance, and they always fall short. And this time, they actually won. People are arguing whether this is the biggest win in Oregon history. It's a regular season game. It was against the number 2 team. Their record against top 2 teams has been absolutely dreadful and dismal. I can understand that, and yet at the same time, Oregon was that close to being a chump again. And I was ready to say the reason why Oregon lost this game is clearly in a game in which the offenses were far above the defenses in the second half. It seemed like a game of who gets the ball last is going to win. And Oregon was in a great setup. They were down, but you kind of felt like they were going to score, and they had 6 minutes with the ball deep in their own territory. And they immediately tried to go for big chunk plays instead of just get your first downs little by little, exhaust the clock, get your score, win the game, don't give Ohio State any time. And what they did was they got big plays down the field, and they scored with more than a minute and a half left, and Ohio State still had 2 timeouts, which they saved and should have saved. I would have given Dan Lanning and their offensive coordinator, Will Stein, an F for clock management late in the fourth quarter in that situation. But as it turned out,
You gave the F to somebody else.
Oh, give the F to somebody else.
0.0.
And, Michigan fans are shedding a tear for Buckeye fans right now.
Yeah,
maybe one or two of them.
Credit to Oregon, and it's a huge win for the former Pac-12. You could argue Washington beating Michigan was a big win for them too, but the Big Ten schedule is about the gauntlet of the Big Ten to me. They proved this one. We'll see how they hold up. We'll see how they look when they come here. What else? We touched on already briefly Penn State and USC. Great game, wild game in the Coliseum. Steve, what did you see here?
Drew Aller was a positive in a big game. Now, Aller doubled his career interception total with 3, and those that bang on Drew Aller, I mean, you're going to hear that. But he threw for nearly 400 yards and converted on 4th and 7 and on 4th and 10 on a drive that forced overtime late. That is far different than the Drew Aller who could barely pass 100 yards against Ohio State and Michigan and looked totally lost while doing it. He doesn't look lost. He looks confident. He looks competent. I thought it was automatic that Ohio State's going to go into Happy Valley in November and win. Now I'm not so sure. USC, by the way, has now lost 3 of their last 4 games, all one-score games, all with a fourth quarter win probability rate of at least 91%.
They were moving the ball. Quarterback threw a horrible pass, too high, got picked off. They really blew this one.
Yeah.
So, they're going
But
nuts.
it's now 3 of their last 4 games in which it looks like they had the game sealed in the fourth quarter, and they didn't.
Okay. So, talking about the gauntlet, Washington is coming off a big win, against Michigan. They head to Iowa, and they get pretty rolled up.
They did. Washington was Washington in that game, in every game that I've seen them play, moving between the 20s and then make a whole bunch of self-inflicted mistakes. And against Eastern Michigan or Weber State, that isn't going to come back to haunt you. But it did against Washington State, it did against Rutgers, and it did against Iowa, who has an improved running game from last year. Caleb Johnson, who's one of the best runners in the nation in terms of yards and touchdowns right now, had 166 and 3 scores. The Huskies went back to beating themselves with critical mistakes during a game where it seemed like they were winning. It just didn't happen against Michigan, where their mistakes really cost them.
This is one of those weekends where we looked at, yes, it was a bye week, but I'm going to pull the fan base for their mood. The mood's down because of what happened to the teams we played.
But the thing is, Washington really wasn't that much different. It was just one of those deals where, as I said, they can move the ball, but they can't finish. They managed to finish with Michigan because they got 2 turnovers in the fourth quarter.
You want to make a point on travel, and I've seen some stats starting to pop up around teams traveling versus a certain number of time zones. What are you seeing here?
I've always thought traveling has a huge effect. You look at Michigan's record. It's dismal when going on the West Coast.
I remember.
A Big Ten team that travels 2 or more time zones are now 3-10. They actually got 2 wins over on Saturday. So this is what happens when you bring up a big statistic. It happens to average out as soon as you say it. Penn State winning over USC, but Penn State really struggled over USC, and that shouldn't have happened. Minnesota at UCLA and IU at UCLA are the other wins. There's a common thread here. Whenever a team travels 2 time zones to play UCLA, you're probably going to win.
Yeah, or Los Angeles apparently is the tie here, but yeah.
But going back to Michigan's dismal record, Michigan has lost 6 of their last 7, dating back to 1983, and if you include losing to Utah in 2015 into that figure, Michigan State hasn't won on the West Coast since 1957.
Wow,
they've lost 15 games ever since. There was a deal about
season.
There was a deal about Wisconsin not being able to win out West years ago. They had a horrible referee thing happen to them at Arizona State maybe about 10 years ago that brought up Wisconsin's futility. I think it is a huge deal, and I don't think it's just limited to the Big Ten. Central and East time zones going west. I think it's the same thing with West going east. And some of those West Coast teams are playing what they feel like are 9 a.m. kickoffs. It's different. You don't see it tangibly where they just lay an egg, but in a one-possession game, there's something that happens where, again, you turn the ball over where somebody normally doesn't turn the ball over, or that other team makes a play that they don't normally make. It's just one of those things, and I expect the travel differences to continue as the Big Ten season goes along, and we'll see what happens next year.
So my wish is that when Oregon comes here, the game is meaningful. for us. Obviously, it should be for them, and that we're better, right? And that this is a game that we can win and we fight. That's kind of when I'm looking at the schedule right now, Steve. Speaking of travel, they got to come here. But there are people who have it worse than us, believe it or not, Steve. I would say even Alabama, after winning this game against South Carolina, they are reeling and they are questioning this coaching genius in Kalen DeBoer right now, because South Carolina, man, just like Vanderbilt, was able to really get chunk yards and move the ball. And the difference is this was in their house and probably had a really good chance to win this game and didn't get it done. The other guy is Lincoln Riley, who USC fans are probably fed up with at this point, if they care. I know Alabama fans care. How much do those people on the West Coast care about Lincoln Riley? But they got to be pissed off right now.
Well, for different reasons. USC is ticked off because they're so close to winning, and they give it away in the fourth quarter. I told you about the win probability rates. At Alabama, this is the problem. When you have a 9-month off season, the stories get repeated, and it's all about Kalen DeBoer being a winner wherever he goes, how he's more relatable and personable to today's players. And they go out and lose a game, and they think the world has basically fallen down. I think this South Carolina game at home, it was the equivalent of Michigan having the scare with Minnesota there, or even the Arkansas State game in which Michigan only won by 10. It was sort of like, man, we should have destroyed Arkansas State, or we shouldn't have let Minnesota come in. They just have this emotional mood thing that goes way down as reality starts to set in. And, you know, Michigan fans have got a big dose of reality possibly coming up this Saturday in Champaign-Urbana.
Oh, boy. So if there's been a North Star or or Southern Star of Texas, it's been Texas, Steve. They seem to be who we thought they were when they left the big house. Like, we got our doors blown off, but we were like, yeah, they're better than us. They're probably the best, one of the best teams in the country, and all they've done is just show that they are. So that's one thing that's been truth so far, I guess, this season, is that they do seem to be the best team. I know there's some other people in the conversations.
Well, Texas is one of those teams like Oregon and Ohio State that not only recruit well on a year basis with high school athletes, but they did very well in the portal. And they've got those guys to fill in those gaps. All three of those schools feel like they're building up to a pinnacle at this point.
Yeah, obviously the nice thing is about the expanded playoff for Ohio. They got plenty of time, and they're probably still firmly in everyone's projected brackets right now. Steve, do we have time for things only Steve cares about?
We have time for the segment that's called Things I Only Care About.
Okay.
That could be either one of us.
I think
Greg.
it's...
Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Everybody knows nobody cares.
No one cares.
Nobody cares.
I care.
Then do whatever you want.
I have a problem, Steve. NFL football Sunday night. Carrie Underwood. I don't have a problem with Carrie Underwood.
You shouldn't.
She's wonderful. I remember when she was on the show. What is it, American Idol? Mm-hmm. She's great. She's beautiful. She's a fantastic performer, Steve. But the song for Sunday Night Football, Waiting All Day for Sunday Night. From a football perspective, Steve, no one's literally waiting all night. Maybe the teams that are playing. Okay, Sunday is the day we play football. We've been watching football all day. We haven't been waiting. We've been watching football all day. We haven't been waiting all day for Sunday night.
Morning, noon, and late afternoon.
Correct.
Before Sunday night.
No one's been waiting. You brought up the other point. Sunday night itself, just as a phenomenon in our culture. No one's really ever waiting for Sunday night. I used to get sad. Jessica used to say, you're sad. Why are you sad? I'm like, it's Sunday night. I got work tomorrow. Like for so many of us.
For 5 consecutive days, you have work tomorrow.
That's right.
If you're a kid, Sunday night is the time where you have put off your homework all weekend, and now you have to cram through Sunday night, and you probably won't get a good night's sleep on Sunday night because of it. Sunday night, if you want to rank nights of the 7, Sunday night might be the worst night, might be the biggest letdown night of the 7-day work schedule.
The joke used to be you used to hear your parents watching 60 Minutes and hear the stopwatch, like,
time to do homework.
All fun is over. All fun is over. It's Sunday night. So who is it? Blues Traveler has a song called Hook, where the whole point of the song is that the words don't matter, but people like the hook in the song or the melody or whatever, right? The chorus is catchy. That's what this is. It's a catchy song, but when you actually stop to think about the words, Steve, No one is waiting all day for Sunday night.
No.
No one. That's the only things I care about, Steve, but apparently you care too.
Just a little bit.
All right. All right. What else, Steve? Are we still national champions?
Yes, we're the defending and reigning national champions, Greg. Go Blue.
Go Blue.